Let's dive into it. I assume some of you are here because of the tier list, so we'll get that out of the way. This is also going to be a YouTube video, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you know what's up. This is going to be a tier list for the upcoming format after Tactical Masters. So basically, you know, Sprite, Tearlament, meta, plus the Tactical Masters archetypes. And since I'm being asked every stream and under almost every YouTube video, you know, what do you think of X or Y deck from last format? I figured I would just like throw together a tier list. I don't think there's a tier 0 deck this format, to be clear. I don't think we're living in a tier 0 world where either Sprite or Tearlament is so powerful that they are considered tier 0. I think there's a couple decks that share the tier 1 category, and then we have an experimental category, which I will throw some decks that I think have the potential to be tier 1 in the future, but could also end up kind of flopping and end up lower down the list, depending on, you know, how people build them in the future and what kind of potential they have. So that's what we do with the experimental category. And tier 2 is a category of decks that are, like, I would say playable, but they're probably not the best deck. Yeah, they're fine, but you could still be playing something else that's probably better, but they can still definitely do well at tournaments. And then tier 3 is the one where I would say those decks are bad. Yeah, if you want to have fun at locals, you can play them, but like if you're trying to do well at a tournament, you should probably not go for one of those. Let's get right into it. There's no particular order to how these decks pop up, but I want to get something out of the way real quick. I believe that Sprite, this is pure Sprite, belongs in the tier 1 category. Like, we're gonna go over different versions for both Sprite and Tearlaments in this. As you see, I have prepared different variations, but I'm gonna throw Danger Tearlaments also into the tier 1 category. In my opinion, at the time of recording this video, I believe that that is the best Tearlament version. Where would I put the Mystic Mind deck that just won the YCS in Brazil? I'm gonna throw it at the very top of tier 2. Simply because always the same argument with Mystic Mind that, like, as soon as it becomes popular, people start preparing for it and then it becomes kind of bad. At the same time though, looking at that deck list, it has so many Mystic Minds and so many other floodgates and so many like ways to protect it. Even if you come prepared for it, it's like very scary to face. So I think I have to put it at least into the tier 2 category. You know, it's gonna be a deck where if people going forward throw even more hate to Mystic Mind into their decks, then you're gonna have some trouble using it, but you're still gonna catch a lot of people off guard. I'm not gonna throw it into tier 1 because that goes against all my principles, but I can't put it lower than tier 2 because that deck is scary. Going forward, we're gonna use this tier 2 category for most of the decks from last format. I've said this on stream a lot of times. I believe that we are in a Sprite and Tearlament format, and spoilers, I will not put anything that's not Sprite or Tearlaments into the tier 1 category for the rest of this video, because I really do think that those two are the best decks by far. Everything else is at best tier 2. So all of your old format decks, your Salamangreat, Drytron, Despia, Sword Soul, all that kind of stuff, I think is at best experimental or tier 2. Which means that the decks are still fine, but comparing them to the Sprite and Tearlament engines is just really, really hard. In terms of power level, it's just like almost impossible to keep up with those two decks. If you want to play one of the tier 2 decks at an upcoming tournament, sure, if that's what you like playing, or if you think you can gain an edge because people are not prepared for it, sure. But those engines are not better than Sprite and Tearlaments. And so that's why I've decided to throw Despia into tier 2. That's why I decided to draw Drytron into tier 2. Salamangreat is like very bottom, if not tier 3. For the sake of my mental health, let's put it in the bottom of tier 2. Adventure Synchro is somewhere here. Punk Therion / Pure Punk is also somewhere here. And Marine Cess is also somewhere down the line. Eldritch as well. I'm trying to sort them in the order of how good I think they are. Flunder is like top of tier 2. Flunder is still very scary. It still has the same issues of bricking, and people usually cite a decent amount of hate for Flunder right now because people just naturally play like the Lightning Storms, the Evenleys, the Talons in their decks. So Flunder takes a little hit from that, but the deck is still very scary once it actually gets to play. I think after Tier and Sprite, it was one of the decks that took the most top cut spots at the Euros and the YCS. I'm gonna put MathMech also into tier 2 category. I personally don't like the deck very much because I think it's very reliant on drawing circular, and the things that it does, even when it does draw circular, I don't think are much better than like Sprite or Tearlaments, but it cannot go second very well. It's just a hand trap pile, and hand traps aren't very efficient this format, so that's why I don't really like MathMech personally. But a lot of people seem to like it, and it is definitely a decent budget option alongside Flunder. Both of those decks, it's worth noting that they are solid budget options for the meta. That's why I'm gonna put them into tier 2. As far as other versions of Tearlaments go, I'm gonna throw the King of the Swamp / Pure Tearlaments also into the tier tier 2 category, maybe experimental. I personally really enjoy the play style, but I have to admit, while I did think that that was the way to go for like a couple weeks, I do realize that the danger version is just that little bit more powerful. It does have that little bit more of an unfair feeling to it. I'm putting this into experimental because I do think that the lists in tier limits that are not danger tier limits have not been figured out quite yet. The Rika deck that won the European Championship, I'm also going to throw into the tier 2 category. I think it's losing a lot of its appeal now that people know what it does, but it still is a deck that heavily benefits from being able to main deck Mystic Mine and Rivalry. Going forward, I do predict a card like Cosmic Cyclone to actually rise in popularity, and that's a card that's actually very good against this deck. It's still a fine deck, but like as soon as people know what it does and people play more hate for Floodgates, which I think that's the direction we have to take in deck building now, it suffers a little bit from that. ABC is the first deck I'm going to throw into tier 3. Like, don't play ABC. The deck has no chance at winning against any deck right now going second, and it does nothing better than any other deck right here. The same goes for Pendulums. Both of these decks are not very good. DDD, same thing. Exo Sisters goes right somewhere into the tier 2 category. It can play Shifter, which is good against tier elements. It's a deck that if you play it, you really hope to face tier elements, but even that isn't like a free matchup because of how powerful tier elements are. It's just Shifter dot deck. It's Hand Trap dot deck, which is like not very good this format because any other hand trap other than Shifter isn't amazing. Ignister, I'm also putting into tier 3. I don't see a reason to play pure Ignister because it's also just a hand trap deck. You can just play Mathmex. Even Marine Says I think is better. Pure Punk is also a better hand trap deck. Exo Sister is a better hand trap deck. Ignister is just the worst hand trap deck. Mystic Mine Striker, I have a feeling of putting it into tier 3, but because it has Mystic Mine, I have to put it into tier 2. It really depends on, like I said, are people gonna start playing Cosmic Cyclones? Then this deck is a tier 3 deck. If people don't, I guess it's tier 2, but even then, the deck really suffers from the Galaxy Cyclone in every tournament list. For example, the Sprite list that I played at Euros doesn't suffer from that because it comes prepared with the Beat Cop. Mystic Mine Striker can't really do that, so even just one Galaxy Cyclone kind of invalidates your entire deck. You don't have great ways of clearing the board in Sky Striker against like a full tournament board. Even if you mine them, if they have Galaxy Cyclone in the grave, they're probably beating you. So like it's very bottom of tier 2, maybe even tier 3. It's not very good. Let's talk about 3 new archetypes from Tactical Masters now. Labyrinth, which I am a little bit biased on this one because I just spent like 4 hours to try and make Labyrinth work, and the deck just feels too fair, man. Before this stream, I was gonna put this deck into the experimental category because that's exactly what I was gonna do with it. I was gonna experiment with it. I had high hopes for the archetype because when I read the cards, they sounded really cool and fun to play. I had fun playing it, but like the games that I lost were still really frustrating because at the end of the day, your deck is just too fair and you're being overrun by unfair stuff. Another one that I haven't tested with, but I'm pretty sure is just straight up tier 3 is the Valiance archetype. The Valiance archetype, I've read all the cards. They're all like kind of cute, but nothing like overwhelmingly strong, and like even when trying to think of an archetype of a deck for it, it's just like it doesn't really come together in any shape or form. I unfortunately don't have very high hopes for Valiance. Runic though, on the other hand, Runic Sprite I will put at the very top of experimental. I think Runic Sprite has great potential, and the Runic engine in general was very good. I spent a stream playtesting pure Runic even, which I didn't include in this tier list, maybe I should have. Pure Runics, like the deck out archetype, is something that I would put into like a meme fun category that can actually win some games. Like it's actually not bad. But the Runic engine in other decks has actually been surprisingly good for me. I mean, the most obvious deck that can play it is the Sprite deck, which is why I put this into the experimental category. I think Runic Sprite has some advantages over pure Sprite. For example, being able to run 3 of the Runic spell that pop spell and trap cards is really cool, because you just naturally have outs too. Gozen, Rivalry, Mystic Mine, Anti-Spell after siding, all these kinds of things. You just have some outs too, which is really cute, I think. And that's a general advantage of the Runic engine. It has a lot of cards that are very flexible, right? All of your cards can either be removal, interruption, or just like extenders. Of course, you lose your battle phase. You're gonna have to find a deck list that can still remove the board without battling, right? Maybe there's even a way to play these in tier elements and stuff, because they are technically not bad to mill, because then you get to draw more more cards with the field spell. Tearlament Sprite, I'm gonna throw into the experimental category as well. I had a hard time narrowing down the Tearlament decks to like singular archetypes or singular decks, but like playing some Sprite cards in Tearlament I don't think is bad. If you mill one jet or one blue, you can just revive it with Elf and do some shenanigans with it. That's cool. If you don't mill them, you can like revive your opponent's blue with Dark, which gets you a whole new line of plays, which is very strong. It makes Dark like much more powerful against Sprite, which is nice. It gives you another interruption in the form of Smashers. It gives you another Mystic Mine out. So like a small Sprite engine in Tearlament I think is something to be experimented with. If you don't have Merly, they are bricks in your hand, so that's something to be aware of. Punk Tearlaments on the other hand, I'm gonna throw into the tier 2 category. Like the Punk engine, I've explained it a lot of times on stream. I've said, don't play Punk cards in Tearlaments, and I stand by that. Punk cards are not the best version of Tearlaments. Of course, drawing a teleport is really, really good in Tearlaments, but you have to be aware that the Tearlament deck, with the Kit Kalos Merly interaction, you already mill 8 cards. Plus, you know, Sharon, Rhinoheart mills. You don't need to mill 5 more with Chaos Ruler. The deck is already very, very consistent. And what you do by adding the Punk engine to it is you add at the minimum 6 cards where only 3 of them are really good draws. Like Teleport is really good. The other 3 are not great and they can mess up your mills like significantly, right? It's just like they are all bad mills. Punk Deer Note is a completely terrible draw. Foxy Tune is not a great draw. It's okay, but not great. Xiamin is a decent draw, but it takes away your normal summon, which you already have enough good normal summons in Tearlaments. It's just very, very win more in Tearlaments to play these cards. It's not necessary. Your end board is good enough. Your deck is consistent enough with the danger version, and these are not even good mills. Like, you don't need these cards in Tearlaments. Don't play them. I still have to put it into tier 2 because the deck is not awful, right? The deck is still powerful, especially when it draws Teleport, but you're simply playing, I think, a worse version of the other Tearlament builds out there. And then we have some outliers here. Virtual World / Virtual World Adventure. I don't see a reason to play this. I'm going to throw it top of tier 3. Sword Soul is exactly like all the other decks. No reason to play it, but it's still not terrible, but it's like at max tier 2. The same goes for Adventure Dragon Link. In the case of Therion Plants, this is just outclassed, I think, by the Rika deck, so I think that goes into tier 3 as well. Chat, remind me, did I forget anything? I guess we can talk about Telephone FTK right now. Telephone FTK is awful because it cannot win going second against any of the decks, so the deck is tier 3 because you can only win going first. Going first, it's powerful though, because people don't play as many hand traps. Oh yeah, I guess we can talk about Tri-Brigade. Any form of Tri-Brigade, Tri-Brigade Sprite, Tri-Brigade Lyrilos, maybe even Runic Tri-Brigade. I think all of those go into tier 2. Simply because they are playable, but for the most part, Tri-Brigade I think is a hand trap based strategy, so it's like not as efficient, this format. And in general, I don't think the engine is more powerful than, you know, what Tearlaments and Sprites inherently already do, so that's where I would put that. I think that should be most of the important things. You know, let's make a deal. As usual, if I forgot your deck, you can leave it in the comments down below under this video, and I will try to answer where I would have put it in the categories. I will simply answer with tier 1 experimental, tier 2, or tier 3 if I forgot your deck. And yeah, that's it. That's my tier list for the meta after Tactical Masters has released and after, you know, European Championship and YCS Rio. And without further ado, leave some feedback in the comments down below. Would you have made the same list? Would you have put something higher or lower? What do you think? And if you haven't yet, you know, subscribe to the channel and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.